Again, my name is Carla Sarake. I will be discussing the topic of my senior thesis research. And I got into this research because I've been preparing a collection for a sessioning into the Hearst Museum of Anthropology with Dr. Christine Hastor for the past 4 years. And I got really familiar with the collection, so I decided to base my research on it. And the collection is associated with the Upper Montaro Archaeological Research Project, or UMARP as they call it. The UMARP project ran from 1982 to 1986 in Jauja, Peru, and households from pre-Inca and Inca time periods were compared across 6 major sites in the Upper Montaro Valley. And the purpose of that study was to basically document the change in the domestic economy that occurred after the Inca imposed their rule. And as my research title mentions, I am focused on the site of Upamalca. So here's what to expect from this presentation. I'm going to introduce my research questions. I'll give you some site context. I'll give a brief overview of the methods and then some of my results. So my research questions are, what are the similarities and differences in artifact assemblages and structures and patios across the sampled households at Upamalca? Do the artifact densities and distributions within the structures and patios align with activity areas? Are they similar or different across households? So Upamalca pertains to a group known as the Sausa. They have a descendant community still in the Upper Montaro Valley. This site is located now in the time period for it is Wonka 2, which is from 1300 to 1460 AD. It's a single component occupation, which means that it doesn't have any complicated stratigraphy, and the artifacts all fall within the Wonka 2 time period and are associated with the Sausa. So prior to 1300, the Sausa were living in and around the Montaro Valley. They were herders and farmers who lived at the bottom of the valley, but there was increasing conflict, and eventually it was no longer safe to live in the valley. So they moved to defensible hilltop sites such as Upamalca by 1300. And in addition to warfare between groups, the Inca had started to take over other people nearby, and that was part of why they moved upwards, and they were able to resist for a while until 1460, when the Inca took over their land and people and forced everyone to move back down into the valley to produce maize and other goods for the state. So here's a typical layout, a typical household layout at Upamalca. There's the patios are labeled in numbers of 50, and then structures are ones, and they're referred to as architectural subdivisions. They're architectural subdivisions that are within the household, and within those subdivisions is where I will be trying to identify activity areas. So how did I address my research questions? Well, I got original data files from the UMARP collection, and they contained ceramic, lithic, botanical, and faunal remain data. Some of it was kind of incomplete. It is a legacy collection, so some things were lost, but anything that couldn't be referenced back to the original data was either taken out or it was noted in the thesis. So I split the 4 artifact categories into 2 groups, and this allowed me to look at the artifacts by function so I can connect them to a general activity. And I referred to these 2 groups as food-associated artifacts and production-associated artifacts. So food-related artifacts are things like ceramics that are used for food, faunal remains, botanicals, groundstone, and blades. And production-associated artifacts in this context are things used for textile production, ceramic production, and lithic tool production. To be able to compare the data across ASDs, I did artifact density calculations. So I standardized the density by taking the mass in grams and then putting it over the volume of dirt excavated. This makes sure that the results are relative to the volume of dirt excavated in every ASD. So if I had 5 things in one ASD and I just took those individual counts and I put them, and in another ASD I had 3, they wouldn't really be comparable because there wasn't an equal amount of dirt excavated. But when you put it over the dirt excavated, it makes it comparable across the ASDs. Yeah. So this is an example of a graph that I made, and I made several of these graphs that displayed every ASD in each household, and then I compared what artifacts were associated where and where the highest densities were. So I have a lot of results, but here are a few highlights. For the first question, do the artifact densities and distributions within the structures and patios align with activity areas? Are they similar or different across households? So typically, in a very Andean fashion, every ASD has multiple activity areas present at once, making it difficult to pinpoint exact activity areas. But the things that I did find were that lithic production is present across all the households and it's happening within the patios and the structures. And a substantial amount of food production happens out in the patio, food preparation. What are the similarities and differences in artifact assemblages in the structures and patios across the sampled households in Pumalca? Households differed in access to ZMAs and tubers, but they typically all had chenopodium, which makes sense because when they moved up and out of the valley, maize doesn't grow well on the hilltops, but chenopodium does. There's camelid present in every assemblage. It'll also make sense because the biggest meat for consumption is camelid because it is the easiest to attain. And not every household had evidence of ceramic production, which is interesting because in previous studies, it is noted that Pumalca is a satellite to a different site, which provides ceramics. So there is likely specialization of households that make ceramics. And I'm assuming that it's 2 of them, which I found. Yeah, so all of the references that aren't my own original results, again, are from the 1987 monograph published by the excavation team. Yeah, thank you so much for tuning in.